Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 224 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Rena. The show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. That's ContinueFit.com. That's where I keep all my podcasts and Strength Coach TV. All right, on the Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about his forum threads, loaded hip thrusts, the importance of 10-yard sprints, and another one called Programming YearLong. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Alan Cosgrove is on to discuss culture is not king. This is from a guy who talks about culture all the time. This is an interesting one from Alan. The Functional Movement Systems segment has Gray Cook back on. He's on to discuss the language of movement is written in feel. For the Train Heroic, Hit the Gym of the Strength Coach segment, I have Brett Klika. He's the co-founder and CEO of SpiderFit. They work with youth athletes. And I talked to him about, are we to blame the strength and conditioning coaches, that is, for the popularity of early sport specialization, or at least part of the blame? Stages of training, starting with different ages, and what should be the focus during those stages. Working with prepubescent kids, should we even do that? How his approach to youth strength and conditioning has changed over the years. Good stuff coming from Brett in a little while. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. Coach, how you doing?
My standard answer, I'm doing great. I always have the same answer. I'm always doing great. Someday I want to answer like, I'm doing lousy, Anthony, but I'm not. So I'm not going to do it.
You know, I had a running joke with a client. He always used to come in and say, Ant, I feel like shit. That was our joke. And one time he came in and he said, Ant, I'm feeling great. And we almost had to call an ambulance that day. I swear to God, because he got winded, or we were doing some step ups and he had to sit down. We had to stop the session. From then on, that was like my second year with him. I trained with him like 11 years. He never ever said, he goes, Ant, I'm feeling like shit, just to make sure he was covered. He didn't want to jinx himself. So good stuff. Coach, Matt Grimm posted a thing about the hip thrust, okay, where it's basically the bridge with shoulder elevated bridge with a bar across your hips. There's been a lot of controversy about it, whether or not it's good or bad on the spine. And, you know, you're not a big fan for a couple reasons. And you had mentioned it because there was another thread. So I kind of wanted you to go over why you're not a big fan besides, is it just a bilateral thing? And we know you don't love bilateral exercises, but give us, why don't you love the loaded hip thrusts?
All right. So do you have the whole segment?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Is this one, I hate the name, hip thrust. I don't like, and I hate the way I see it done most of the time, because what I see is a hip thrust. And I usually, when you see these videos, the people are usually doing them too heavy. They're usually doing them too fast. And there's usually a huge amount of uncontrolled lumbar extension, all things. And I'm like, and then you go back, is it not, do you just not like the bilateral version? It's like, yeah, it's kind of like the back squat. Like I look at that and think, I don't love that exercise in terms of what it's going to do to somebody's lumbar spine potentially. Then I look at the unilateral version. And now because I flex the opposite hip, much like the quick hip lift, single leg bridge kind of idea, I flex that opposite hip. And suddenly I think, hey, actually now I really like that version of the exercise. Then I get into, okay, I can do those now for sets of 10. How do I load them effectively? And then Elspeth comes along with her little climbing belt idea. And suddenly now you take an exercise that, okay, now I really like this exercise. And then it's a question of, okay, how much weight can I get? Because when you look, there are people doing the hip thrust, just on the ground. If you look at it, the kind of Brett Contreras version with 400 pounds.
Yeah.
Then thinking, I always think anytime you need to add a pad to the bar, it's probably not a good exercise. Anytime the exercise is cutting into something so badly that you have to try to protect yourself from the bar, right off the bat, I say, that's not a really good choice.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There we are.
And what I loved about this thread too is, again, I know I do say this a lot, but I think it's amazing. I'm thinking, okay, this will be like a yes, yes and no answer, shut down but it got pretty deep. A lot of people, like you said, Elspeth sent that the video with those bands, and then the TRX one, and then did you try? Brian Robinson sent the one with the landmine.
I tried the one, but again, because I don't think I love the feel of that, the end of the bar laying in my kind of abdominal area.
Yeah,
I tried it, so I don't know. I'm not. I probably should try it before I say I'm not a fan.
I think what's going to happen too is that bar is going to be able to roll where it won't roll if you have the whole bar across. So he only has the end piece on the hip, right? So it's going to be able to kind of move a little bit. And obviously, if you're doing one leg, you're not like your theory about single leg squats or any unilateral exercise. You can't load it as much. So obviously, that's going to help as well.
Yeah. And like I said, much like that single leg bridge or leg lock bridge or cook hip lift or whatever you want to call it, when you flex that opposite side, you make it physically more difficult to extend your lumbar spine. It is not easy to extend your lumbar spine when that opposite side hip is flexed. And then now you start thinking about incorporating some breathing to get a big exhale to get the kind of solidification of that core area that you want. Add, like for me, I like to add a little pause at the top so I can really get my glute to contract. So I'm not thrusting, I'm not bouncing myself up there. It's not like boom, boom. It's like up, squeeze, down, up, squeeze, down. Very, very different.
You bring up a good point, because there was another thread which is basically talking about the same exercise, right? So we have this whole semantics thing, right? They said single leg hip lift.
Right.
So here we have the hip thrust. We have the single leg. I mean, the language, we need to get on the same page. But they were talking about that person had some back pain while doing it. And I know we can never, internet diagnose, but he was trying to keep her focused on engaging her core throughout the movement to fix it. But he was wondering if it was a stability issue. He said she had no tightness. Her overhead squat was a 3. Brian Robinson actually mentioned, maybe it's a little too much lumbar extension. That's what I always go back to when I see some pain in that exercise. What were your thoughts?
Same exact thing. Then I'm pretty sure I wrote that too on there, that I do think, because again, usually when you see that with people, what you see is poor performance of the exercise. That could consist of some people doing it single leg with the other leg extended. That could mean single leg, somebody doing it without enough hip flexion of the other leg. So I want to make sure that we're up at least at 90 with that opposite side leg, that we're going slow and under control, and that we're looking at where the motion is coming from. I think that's the biggest thing, is looking and saying, okay, is this, much like if we looked at quadruped hip extension, it's very easy to mimic hip extension with lumbar extension. And if somebody is that type of person, if they're a person who tends to move through their lumbar spine rather than through their hips, and those are generally going to be people who don't use their glutes well, they're also going to be people who get back pain.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Another good one, Matt Sinisalchi talked about programming YearLong. We got some great conversation in this. It basically, his question was, for long in seasons, how do you plan for teams through those seasons? So typically off-season programming is straightforward if you have 8 to 12 weeks, but with in-season, how do other coaches view phases, early in-season, mid-season, late in-season, playoffs? Because obviously, he's trying to break down that in-season. Coach, how do you do it?
Well, I think that was a perfect illustration of why somebody should be on this site. Because when you look at just what Devin wrote or what Bob Alejo wrote, or you got some really good quality information out of again, what seemed like a pretty simple question. So for me, it's different. And I put my thoughts in there kind of. I'm of that mind that I just kind of undulate my way through the season in terms of 3 or 4 week blocks. I said I'm a real big fan of kind of the easy strength idea, particularly. And I think part of it, and I believe I said it in the thread, it kind of depends on who you're dealing with. Matt's dealing with an MLS soccer team. Devin's dealing with his UMass Lowell hockey team. I was dealing with my BU hockey team. I think, Bob had his basketball guys who were used to lifting, say at NC State, I think was the example that he was using, specifically. If I've got soccer guys, if I've got reluctant people or people that have not done a lot of in-season lifting, that's where I love that easy strength idea. Give them something that's too light to begin with, and then coax them up. You realize that I got a lot. It's like, the difference between, I always say between searing meat and slow, putting it in your crock pot kind of thing. Do I have 5 minutes to grill it, or do I have all day today to put it in the crock pot and make it perfect, so that I can't, the meat falls off the bone kind of thing. And I think that's what you've got to know. Devin probably can go a little harder at his guys because his guys have a really, really good training base. Whereas Matt might look at his and think, man, I got to really kind of ease my guys along, because if I get any soreness, everybody's going to freak out on me, and they're going to be running to the coach and saying we're doing too much in the weight room and all that stuff. So I think it's really important to look at your sport, look at your team, look at your level of experience. But in any case, you've got to be working on gradually increasing the load. And I remember I did this with Andrew Miller when he was with the Red Sox, and he was a big, tall, lanky, 6'7", great reliever who wasn't a guy that really loved the weight room. He'd do his work, but he didn't love it. And it was one of those, I can remember, we went probably 16 kilo kettlebell, 20 kilo kettlebell, 24 kilo kettlebell for things like, split squat and straight leg dead, one leg straight leg deadlift during the whole season. So he probably only went, but he might have gone from 16K for 5 to 24K for 5 by the end of the season. But the reality was he was a lot stronger at the end than he was at the beginning. If we look at the loads, we look at the amount of weight that he was handling. But I don't know if he ever had any perception that any of the workouts were ever hard, because it was always, nice and easy. Let's go up to, we'll go up to, we'll do a set of 16, then do a set of 20, then do a set of 16. And then we'll do a set of 16. We'll do 2 sets of 20. Let's just do 3 sets with the 20 today. Now let's do a set of 20, a set of 24, a set of 20. That kind of thing. But over the course of your baseball season takes friggin' forever. You start and you go until October. But you can really, if you follow that slow cooking idea, you can sneak some people up and they don't even know it. They look at it and think, oh, I haven't got that much stronger. We don't lift weight. We don't really lift heavy during the season. But when I look back at what they did, I'm like, actually, no, you did get stronger. So,
Coach, I want you to just to kind of take a step back here. Imagine that there's a lot of people out there that never even really heard of easy strength. So I understand what you're talking about. How do you interpret the easy strength idea? If you're going to talk to an intern about, look, we want to get this guy stronger this year, and we're going to use this easy strength approach, what does that mean to you?
Well, easy strength, I think, to me means starting probably at a lower relative intensity than you want to. And, in some ways, like I look at it, I think there's so many of these things, Wendler's 5-3-1 or easy strength or some of these other things. But it's that basic idea that I'm just going to take this long, slow road. Like you might look at it and think, okay, I got to get up, the hill, the hill's here. And it's like, how are we going to get up? Well, we're going to start down the bottom. We'll just every day we'll walk up a couple steps, and we won't be in any hurry, whenever. And it's the book, I think it was Made to Stick. They talked about 20-mile marching, and in Made to Stick, they contrasted 2 missions to like the North Pole, the South Pole. And the guy who made it, I forget the 2 guys' names, but the guy who made it instituted what he called 20-mile marching, which meant we went 20 miles on a good day. We went 20 miles on a bad day. If it was a good day, we didn't try to go 40 miles. We just went 20 miles every day. When we'd done our 20 miles, we made camp. On a tough day, we pushed ourselves a little bit and we went 20 miles. Whereas the other guy was all over the map, up and down. And I think, that easy strength to me is this idea like there's no big spikes, there's no big increases. It's just, if you looked at it and thought, I'm just going to ease this thing up the hill, the slowest way possible. I guess I would look at easy strength and say, I'm going to take the slowest possible route as opposed to the fastest possible route. And that may be really kind of my interpretation of what I liked out of that book.
Yeah.
But that was my interpretation of what I liked out of that book, was just this idea that we can start low and take a really long time to work our way up and literally gain easy strength.
Yep.
As opposed to being this guy who's pushing, RM kind of loads. Like if I looked at it and said, hey, you can do 87.5 for 5. That's what I want you to do. I might look at it and think, no, I want you to do like 70 for 5. And next week we're going to do 72. And next week we're going to do 75. And next week we're going to do 77. And it might take us 10 weeks to get to 85. But we got 30 or 40 weeks. So I'm going to be fine. And then we're going to jump over that hurdle when we get there really easily. And you're never even going to know it was there.
Yeah, and you had been talking about this for a long time with the 2.5 plates. 2.5 plates to put on the barbell, right? I mean, and I got a guy right now, this morning actually, lifted, he deadlift 300. He's like 58 years old. But we started at 225 a while back. And I said, you're going to do one rep but every week we're going to go up 5 pounds. That's it. So we slowly gone up because he wanted to if it was up to him, he would have gone up much quicker. But I was like, no, 5. And so we've kind of slowly done that. And, that's part of one of his goals. So that was kind of cool. Didn't Michael Hyatt was talking about those 2 expeditions as well, right?
Yeah, he did. He mentioned it. I shouldn't find the book. I probably have the book on my shelf somewhere and pull it back out. But I just remember this because I always say to people when they say like, oh, MBA, what's the key to your success at MBSC? I said, our key to our success, 20-mile march. In terms of we're going to go 20-mile march every day. Because I can remember, I think I've said this before on a podcast, but somebody came to us one time and wanted us to advertise on New England Sports Network, which is what the Bruins are on. And I remember sitting there and it was kind of a lot of money. And I looked at Bob and I said, okay, Bob, here's my big question. If this Nesson ad was to double our business, what would we do? He's like, we'd be screwed, right? I'm like, absolutely, we'd be screwed. That we could not possibly handle. And so if you look, like if I was to lay out MBSC's revenue for you year by year and say, yeah, when I took back over 8 years ago, we were at X and now we're at 3 times X. But I told you we never had a year probably where we were over 12% growth. You'd be like, wow, that meant you had to, you had to be growing every year. And I'm like, yep, we were literally using the power of compound interest, and it was like, if we were at $1 million, and the next year we were at, 1.1, and then the next year we were at, 1.3, and then, and you just keep adding those little 10% on there, compounded. All of a sudden you've doubled or tripled your number in that kind of 20-mile marching mode of never really stretching it.
Coach, let's move on to Phil Marsden asked about a lot of talk about Tony Holler's article and the discussions in the staff meetings and about adding these 10-yard sprints. And he had asked about the 10-yard sprint importance and opinions on what to take out. Would it be better to do acceleration work at the expense of hang power cleans? Or if you were in his situation, would you still leave in the sprint acceleration bucket to the teams, even though it might not be coached like we would, continuing to focus on what they don't get elsewhere, like obviously those empty buckets? What did you feel like? What was your answer?
I just felt like the max speed thing, even in low volumes, I think you got to do it. If you look at Tony's stuff, and I always say that when you look at stuff and think, when you can kind of stare it down and think, yeah, this is what I'm missing. This is something that we're not getting. Because one of the things, and he was saying kind of the same as us, we've always done sprints, always. We've never not done sprints, whether it was lean fall runs or ball drops or partner chase sprints or whatever.
Yeah.
But we've never been in that quantifiable area of really saying it's sort of like we lip serviced our sprints and we hoped that people would run fast, but we never really gave them the proper motivation to really run fast. Timing. So to me, I look at it and think we haven't changed anything from a kind of timing workout design standpoint, we've just changed what we're doing during that segment. And I think that's what's critical. And it's funny, I'm going to post, did I send you that acceleration ladder one yet?
No.
All right, I'm going to send that out. I'm going to try when we're done. I'm going to send that to YouTube because that's one of the things I want to post is we've been playing around with the old. Now, if you remember, not the speed ladder, an acceleration ladder is gradually increasing distance rungs. Some people call it stick drill. Tony calls it wickets. The old Speed City, Randy Smythe, 1980s, 90s was called an acceleration ladder. I started looking at what people were doing, started kind of listening to what Randy was talking, what Tony was talking about, listening to what Cam Joss was talking about, and said, I got to get one of those ladders again, the acceleration ladder. So I had Chris Poirier get me one from the track side. And I love it because it really teaches patterning in a way because the strides are increasing. You've got these sort of sticks that are going out in like 6-inch increments. So imagine the first one's 3 feet, kind of the same thing we talk about 20-mile march, 3 feet, 3, 6, 4, 4, 6, 5, so that somebody's got to work on that pattern of stride length. And it was amazing. I put a couple of my pro baseball players in it, and both Kevin Carr and I were standing there, and it was like, wow, they look better, don't they? I'm like, okay, I thought it was me thinking that they looked better, but they definitely look better.
Wow.
And I think, even Ken Whittier was saying, oh, we should line these up, when we do our tempo runs, we should just put one, it's almost like we're going to set up 4 of them, so that you run your first, you run out of it, you go up to the other end, you turn around, you run out of the other one going, because it's amazing what giving somebody some patterning is going to do for them. And it was really cool to watch. I had Mark and his friend Mia that he works out with in it, and it was the same thing. They definitely looked better when they were in that little acceleration ladder. So
cool, Coach. Before we get to the Q&A portion for strengthcoach.com, let's talk a little bit about, you had posted strength standards for adult clients. You were talking about your adult clients 35 to 65. You're trying to get set some standards for in various lifts. Why don't you expand on this?
So, yeah, it was interesting. And I think part of that, and Brendan did a nice job. I had Brendan kind of chime in on that because it was from his presentation. But it was a little bit of, I think, misinterpretation of what we were saying, in the sense of Brendan was just talking about kind of strength standards and what we'd like to see. And I think, I'm trying to think, I can't think of his name now, but he's a site member who kind of took it and said, okay, I need a rear foot elevated split squat standard for my adult clients. And I was like, I don't think you can do it almost without, like I was saying, without putting it in weight classes and then reversing it, meaning that, hey, it might be 20% for people under 150 pounds, and it might be 10% for people at 150 to 200, and it might be body weight for people that are over 200 in terms of what the standard is. If you get, say, I got an adult fitness client who's 200, I'd be like, okay, body weight for 10 would be great. If I've got an adult fitness client who's 175, and I might look and say, okay, 17.5s in each hand for 10 would be great. If I've got someone who's 130, I might be like, well, 25s in each hand might be great, because it's literally the reverse of what we might think of in other kind of body weight oriented exercises. Because body weight really is the load. So suddenly, you're stuck. It's the starting load no matter whether you want it to be or not, once you're in that position.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know, because I feel like I always I think I overthink it originally with just kind of saying, okay, but if I'm doing a single leg deadlift, right, body weight, I don't feel like I'm doing a 210 pound single leg deadlift. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel the same.
Single leg deadlift, because you're not. When you start thinking about, now you've created that kind of, teeter-totter here.
Yeah.
Which is different. And it is clearly going, you're not using body weight in terms of, you're probably, let's just say 75% of body weight to make it simple. And then realize that weight isn't going. Now that weight's being counterbalanced by the weight on the backside. So we've got a little bit of the seesaw effect there.
Yeah.
With maybe, some favoring of the trunk arm side. But, now you've got it offset by another 25% probably that's on the back. So now you've got 25% versus 50%. You know what I mean? So when you start thinking about the relative load that hamstring, you talk about overthinking it, but now I'm really overthinking it for you.
Yeah.
That relative load of the hamstring is less. But now you go to split squat and it's a very vertical load and you stand on one leg. Now you do have 100% because now the weight is going up and down. And maybe I always said you can eliminate the weight from the shin down. So you might be eliminating 10%. You know what I mean? So for a 200-pound person, in one sense, one leg straight leg deadlift, they might be working with, 50% of body weight, maybe. And not even that, 25% of body weight, really, when you start figuring out what's counterbalancing away. And when you go to rear foot elevated split squat, you might be working at 90% of your body weight. So I think that's what makes those two lifts so different from a body weight standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about that? And I just made that right off the top of my head, but I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard when you don't have a piece of paper and pen in front of you trying to figure it out. So good stuff. All right, Coach, we're going to let you go for this portion of the show. This is the Strength Coach podcast portion. We're going to do some Q&A now. So, Coach, thanks for doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right now at Perform Better, select items are 30% off. That's 30% off already low prices, so big savings right now at Perform Better. The next one-day seminar is in Los Angeles, February 10th. Rachel Cosgrove, Charlie Weingroff, Martin Rooney, and Dan John. That should be an interesting one. And did you know Perform Better has financing? I actually never knew that. They're not a lender, but they've partnered with leading finance companies in the marketplace to provide you with competitive rates. So you can check it out. They have like a little form you can fill out online. Very cool. Check it out at performbetter.com. You can see all their products and their info on their educational seminars.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is the Business of Fitness section here on the world-renowned Strength Coach podcast. And this is obviously your favorite part because you all tune into this. All right, here's what I'm going to talk about this week. This episode is brought to you by ResultsFitnessMentorship.com. Please come over there and check us out and see if you want to come out and spend a couple of days with us out here at Results Fitness and see what we do. So I've talked a lot over the years in this segment about culture and how culture is all powerful and it's the key thing. Building your core values and building your culture, and everything is about culture. And now I'm just going to drop the hammer and tell you culture isn't king. Now the phrase is culture eats strategy for breakfast, operational excellence for lunch, and everything else from dinner by Peter Drucker. It's a famous quote from one of the world's best business consultants. But I think it may have been misinterpreted because it's a single sentence. And I, as probably one of the biggest proponents of core values and culture when it relates to fitness, I'm going to try to clarify my thoughts on this. That quote makes it sound like culture is the only thing that matters, that culture is all powerful. And if you have a great work culture, everything will just be great, like everything will fall into place. But it's not the only thing that matters because it can't be. Now, it's a key factor and it's an equal play, and I don't want you to ignore it, right? I'm not contradicting what we said previously, but you still need to consider the operations of your business and the key responsibilities. Now, a poor culture will destroy your business for sure, but a fantastic culture without any key staff members in place, without any sort of corporate or operations structure, that's just guys hanging out, right? So there seems to be an overabundance of culture right now. But a business needs an operations flowchart. It needs to know who each player in the team reports to, who they report to, who reports to them, what their roles and responsibilities are. So teamwork, and as we say at Results Fitness, be we, not me. No amount of that can compensate for a complete misunderstanding of what your job in the company is and how it works to deliver your services. So I'll give you an example. My sales manager is one of the best in the world, I think, in getting new members. Super approachable guy, a lot of fun. And that means for my younger members of staff, he ends up being their confidant, right? He ends up being their friend for their issues or any problems at work, or to be honest, anything going on in their lives. So while on paper that doesn't sound like a bad thing, he's not my HR department. He's not qualified to be dealing with this stuff. And most importantly, when he is dealing with this stuff, he's not doing his job. So he's stepping out of his core competency, which is sales and getting in new members, and what he gets paid for to do something that he's not good at, while he's still getting paid for the other job, right? That's not the key thing. Because when he says, and you've heard me say this before, when he says yes to helping with time clock issues or whatever comes up, he is saying no to doing what he's paid for. You quite simply cannot do two things at once. So he's spending time doing something he's not good at and ignoring what he's really good at. So consider this. If any staff member is distracted on your team for a mere 30 minutes per day, that's 2.5 hours a week. Compound that over a year, and we're looking at 130 hours of lost productivity. That's 3.25 full 40-hour paid work weeks spent not doing their job. At some level, that's theft, right? So if you have just 10 employees all not focused on their job because they don't understand it, we're at 1,300 hours of lost productivity. That's 8 months. In business terms, that's the equivalent of paying a full-time staff member each year for only 20 weeks of actual work. So the people that come to him with their problems, when it's time for them to work, designing programs or whatever they have to do, they'll put headphones on as to not be distracted, or they'll move to a quieter part of the facility so they can work uninterrupted, because they'll guard their time but don't respect his. So who's to blame here? Is it him for not saying no and sticking to his job and getting easily distracted? Is it them for interrupting him and not going to the correct person with any of their challenges and not respecting his time? Or is it C, it's me? Because it's none of the above. The blame lies with me, or more specifically, the organization. We haven't been clear as to who to take your payroll problems to, who to take your time off requests to, who to run program problems by, who to run things by as it relates to each area within the business. Everyone on the team has to understand who does what. A problem with the training program doesn't go to the sales manager. A problem with the contract doesn't go to the training team. The front desk manager doesn't deal with who's covering a class. That's a poor use of resources and an incorrect use of them. And that will only ever lead to an underperforming business and eventually you going out of business. So, while culture is still a key factor in the success of any organization, please don't overlook key job descriptions and an operational structure and making sure everyone understands their key responsibilities within their organization, including you. Guys, that's it from me this week. Follow up with any questions as usual in the forum. This has been brought to you by resultsfitnessmentorship.com, and I will talk to you guys next time.
The language of movement is written in feel, not in words and pictures, and I can prove it. Most babies get a command of walking without a lot of visual imagery or without a lot of verbal instruction. Now, that's not to say they don't hear the words and they don't see other people walking, but they must pattern themselves based on the way gravity feels, their center of mass over their base of support feels, and they work it out. And believe it or not, I think they actually do it as quick as they do it because nobody's coaching them and because nobody has a template of what a perfect squat or perfect step or perfect roll looks like. What do? They interact with their environment. Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and failure. They basically go out into the environment, and babies don't repeat activities that don't give them positive reinforcement. They learn quickly from negative reinforcement and even quicker from pain. Aristotle said, life's greatest teacher is pain. You want to go a little bit deeper in this? Here's what I want you to know. When people do a movement screen, one of the first things I ask them is, which one of those movements was most difficult for you? And they'll say the push-up or the squat or the lunge. And the very first thing I ask them to make sure that they get where we're going is, do you think making it more difficult would help? Well, hell no. That was already hard enough the way it was. And that was a body weight movement screen of you using your own body weight in space. And yet somebody is waiting right over in the corner with a dumbbell, a kettlebell, a sandbag, or a band or a rope that's going to take that same movement that already gave you difficulty. It feels very difficult. And they're going to make it more difficult. Is that really going to help? When you can't read Dr. Seuss, I don't know if you're ready for War and Peace. It just doesn't work that way. And reading War and Peace, or at least struggling there, won't make you better at Dr. Seuss. I guess what I'm saying is that your own perspective of your movement has a big deal to do with how we train you. And I don't know how you feel, but I can definitely see when something's difficult for you by the struggle that you have to go through on a simple movement screen. I can find those patterns that are hard for you. The first thing we do is we don't need to stress those patterns anymore. We need to deconstruct them and sort of spoon feed them back to you because you got disorganized at some point. Now, one of the drills I think is very, very empowering to do for us and our clients is actually show somebody the movement patterns in a movement screen first, but don't talk to them about it. Just show them the shapes like squat, lunge, hurdle step that they got to get their body into. Get them to put some skin in the game. How do you think you're going to do on these movements? And they're going to say, oh, I'm going to do great, or I'm going to do horrible, or I know I can't do that one. Let them say what they want to say. Run them through the objective baseline. We've tried to make the FMS reliable and objective. Now, what's getting ready to happen is one of three distributions at the end of that movement screen. Their confidence about their movement is less than their reality. Their confidence is more than their reality, or their confidence is easily matched to their reality. Now, if you move better than you think you do, there's a good chance you're not challenging yourself. If you move significantly worse than you think you do, you're probably going to put yourself in a situation where you're not going to benefit or even put yourself at risk. And if you know exactly how you're going to move before you've ever gone through that movement screen, you're a good self-regulator. And not only do you read and write movement patterns good with your own body, you have that visual imagery that allows you to say, yeah, I can do that. So I think that one of the untapped things in movement screening and the way we look at movement is you got to get somebody's perception of movement before you do the screen, not after. And it really tells you if they're overambitious, underambitious, if they're going to challenge themselves, if they're going to over-challenge yourself. And I'd like to think if we did a little bit more of that, we'd have a lot better results than we do. We've been talking about fitness and making fitness videos for 30 years, and we haven't put a dent in obesity, low back pain, or female ACLs. We haven't done our job because we've converted something that we should feel into words and pictures without ever going back and changing the feel. When I make your push-up and squat less difficult, I don't need a lot of numbers, words, and pictures to tell you that. You tell me that. We should strive to movement screen and train functional movement that way.
All right, guys, we talked last week about Train Heroic, and I was saying how it's becoming much harder now to make it in this business. You need an additional revenue stream. That's a fact. You need to scale beyond the confines of your gym, and that's where Train Heroic comes in. I've tried different online software. This is my third one, and these guys, this is the most user-friendly that I've come across. What's really cool, too, is it's pretty diverse. I'm using it for clients, and then you can use it for teams, which I'm not using it for, but I'm also going to write a program that I can sell to the general public. So it's awesome. You can just make this program, sell to the general public. They do all the work. What's really cool about it, though, is the support. It's amazing. They ramp you up really quick. As soon as you sign up, they send you an email, and it's to do like a call, like a webinar call with them. You got to do this. They go over everything you need to know. I actually did another one the other day because I had a specific question, because I am doing a program that I can sell to the general public, just kind of like a canned program. I'm really excited about it. Head over to trainheroic.com. You start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you, and you'll save 25% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro Edition. All right, let's get to the Train Heroic Hit the Gym with a Strength Coach segment. Today I have on Brett Klika, and he's a world-renowned youth fitness expert and author, written so many articles for StrengthCoach.com, even interviewed him for the site for some of those articles way back when we were just talking about it. He's the co-founder and CEO of SpiderFit. And at SpiderFit, they believe that personal trainers, teachers, parents, coaches, and therapists all have a tremendous opportunity to inspire children to a life of fitness and physical literacy with the power of play. You know, he started working with kids coaching soccer in 1993. I think that's all where we start. A lot of our roots come from. But he got his bachelor's degree in exercise science from Oregon State. He was working at Fitness Quest 10 for a while. He's helped create fitness and wellness programs for school districts, youth sports clubs, major health club chains, and Fortune 500 companies. His recent book through Chronicle Publishing called 7 Minutes to Fit helps busy parents find time for health. And that's been translated into 3 languages and is an Amazon bestseller. Brett, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Anthony.
All right, like we had talked about in the email, our emails together, you were, early specialization, obviously super hot topic. Like you were saying, we don't want to belabor that because we are preaching to the choir. I want to dig a little deeper into this idea, though. We've seen so much. I think, it's probably this part of this balance between, some of the Anders Ericsson deliberate practice type of, that got misconstrued through the 10,000 hours. People think they're just going to have their kids play for 10,000 hours, play that one sport, and it's going to be good. And I think with some of the sports, it's really hard to say, okay, lacrosse is helping your hockey, is helping your baseball, but let's talk about the strength and conditioning coaches. Can we take some of the blame for the popularity of this? Because, there's some big chains out there for popularity of early sports specialization I'm talking about, because, we have titles like youth strength and conditioning coaches. I've had Jim Kilbasso on here recently. He's the head of the IYCA. We've kind of created this industry around it. Are we to blame for some of this popularity of the early sports specialization?
Anthony, the truth is, and I consider myself as part of this wave, but I think that inadvertently we've kind of become part of the machine, the early sports specialization machine, and it comes from a good place, but it all comes from a place of a lot of us. If we're not working as a teacher at a school or as a coach employed by a school or a club or an organization, we're out there as personal trainers or in our facilities, in our studios, and whatever it is. And it's a very competitive marketplace, and it's become more and more competitive over the years. I really started working in 2000. In the year 2000, I started working with a lot of high schools, and it was great. I mean, in San Diego, there just was no competition. We went in, we just said, "Hey, I do speed and performance training," and the coach was like, "Wow, speed training? That's amazing!" And so we got everything. But then the market's become saturated, so I found myself earlier in my career like, "Oh man, if I'm going to talk to the soccer coach of these 9-year-olds, I can't just say that we're going to do general speed work and just general development. I got to be like, oh, well, I can do this for your soccer players." And then I got sucked into this whole idea of like, well, from a business standpoint, I wanted to communicate to these coaches that, hey, this was for soccer, and I have a very special program for soccer. I have a very special program for softball. And even though I knew that I was just doing pretty general development things, I got sucked into it. And then I even got sucked into a point where the coach telling me, well, yeah, they went to this other place and they did these special softball specific rotational exercises. And even though I'm looking at these exercises, say that's not even fundamentally sound, that's not part of what I would consider development, man, I needed to pay the bills. And so I start chasing, and I found myself chasing these rabbits. It just was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this and have this lacrosse program. And I found myself doing that until, and to be dead honest, I don't know if it was more of a come to Jesus moment of just like, Brett, what are your ethics here? Where are you going? Or if I got to a point in my career where I was comfortable enough to essentially say, wait a minute, let's run some interference here, and really looking at guys, digging education. And I really credit Mike Boyle as someone early on that, even though I had tremendous mentors, man, I was working with Todd Durkin for God's sake. But, you got a guy like Boyle who is just saying, hey, boil things down to the fundamentals and let's keep things simple. And that resonated so well with me because I saw where I was headed. I mean, these kids were coming out of my program. They'd been really busy, and I had sold programs and got a lot of success in that realm, but I wasn't really creating anything on the other side. They weren't emerging from the program. And I think a lot of us in the private industry are finding ourselves in just competing in the market, sort of feeding into this notion. Also, parents are coming in with this idea that their 10-year-old's going to get a college scholarship. And whether we realize it or not, we're hopping onto that train. Oh yeah, we're training them to get a scholarship. When in reality, and I've been able to see kids longitudinally over about 18 years. So literally when I first started training, I still am in touch with many of these kids that I've worked with. And you see where they end up and you see where life takes them. And I tell you where they end up, it's not professional athletes. And quite frankly, a lot of kids are in college track. Let's say they they're on that college track to play in college. Well, to make it all the way through the 4 or 5 years of college, even if they are a scholarship recipient, it's really tough for them to make it all the way through. So I started to see longitudinally, oh man, I'm not working with the future of sports here with these kids. I'm working with the future of our healthcare system. And once you get comfortable with that idea, and once you realize the realities of what we're doing, I think that we can step back a bit and get ourselves out of that machine, because it's a damaging machine and it's very easy to get sucked in. Not because we're evil, it's because we're trying to make a living.
Yeah, but I guess I'll kind of defend you on this one. Is I'm at the same time, sometimes we do have to add a little sizzle with our steak, right? Just to kind of because I'd be like, well, I'd rather have my kid training with Brett, who's doing some responsible things, because even though they weren't getting the college scholarships, you probably did them a whole lot of good in terms of, being able to move, being healthy, etc. But maybe, again, I don't know if you promised anybody scholarships, but I'd rather see them going to you and getting a good, solid, safe program than some of these other places that we're just going to say, hey, we're going to increase your vertical jump and we're going to do this, and they're going to beat them into the ground.
100%. And when I say that, that's why I say, I inadvertently realize it's all in, hindsight's 2020, and say, hey, if I just at this time, I wish I would have started doing this earlier, and I wish I would, and I don't regret it. The kids that I worked with from day one are still in contact. Our impact as a strength coach working with kids, it changes their lives. And when we're young, we might not realize the impact we have on their overall life, but it's tremendous. And, hindsight, yeah, I wish I would have done this and that. But now as I'm trying to share with other trainers, like, hey, your impact can be huge. And you also have these opportunities to do these other things. So let's use our whole opportunity we have.
Yeah. I want to talk about, I think this is not a controversial topic, but I think I first learned it through the Titleist Performance Institute, which I think does an amazing job with their junior training program. But they followed kind of the long-term athletic development, which again is another controversial kind of method or system. Not in a bad way, but just more like people don't always agree with some of these different groups or starting ages. Yep. Talk to me about your thoughts on, because that long-term athletic development, we're talking about 5 to 7, 8 to 10, yep. 11 and 12, 13, 14, 15 and up. Can you give us your different stages of training? And then with each group, what would you be focusing on?
Yeah, so, and to preface it, I look at kids a lot differently because of that longitudinal experience that I've had. I look at them a lot differently than I used to, because yes, it's long-term development, but it's almost like long-term human development. We can call it athletics, we can call it whatever we want. We got to remember, these kids are eventually going to become, they're not going to become pro athletes. Eventually, they're probably going to become accountants or doctors, or they're going to sell solar panels for roofs or something like that. Yeah, just to do what we do. They're going to help other people, inspire other people. So when I look at, okay, what first thing, and by the way, if you look at research, what's the highest correlate of success? If you look at, what separates the kids that are actually going to be pro athletes or not, and the number one correlate is their level of enjoyment with the particular sport or the activity. So it's a twofold. When I get a kid, I don't care what age they get involved, my number one interest is to inspire a real, not only a love for movement and fitness, but just get them to appreciate almost the art of sport and the art of training and just the whole love for it. So that's really where I'm coming in from a more, broader perspective. But when kids come to me, I'm not working with 2-year-olds. Really, when it comes to, and when you look at neurologically what's happening, it makes sense to start. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense before 5 years old to really do much more than provide a sensory rich environment. So playgrounds are great. My daughter's 4 years old. We've turned our garage into a gym, and I got my squat rack and my weights and all my stuff in there. But I've also got a little balance beam for her. And she just goes in there and does stuff. I just let it there, and she just goes, because one thing that we overlook as strength coaches is sensory development. Kids, when they used to run around outside all the time and just play and go crazy when they were little, all the free play, they would develop this sensory system, and they'd be able to integrate their sensory system with their motor system. So they play outside so their eyes could see all the way to the horizon. They learn to process sound. They would wrestle around. They learned to process tactile information. They were always moving. Their proprioceptive systems were good. Their vestibulars, they rolled down hills. They'd do all these things, and they don't do that anymore. So when we start to enter a more controlled training environment about 5-ish, my focus from 5 to 7 is that sensory awareness. So we're playing games, we're creating a training situation where I have whatever equipment I buy, whatever I use, we're working on these sensory skills and the perceptual motor skills. There's 9, and there's some people who have defined more, but 9 perceptual motor skills that we're really looking at. I'm not teaching them necessarily how to squat. I'm teaching them how to learn. I'm teaching them the skills of learning readiness. And can they listen? Can they see? Can they do all these different things? And we're just playing games. I'm introducing, because kids are capable of a basic notion of a squat or a push-up. But my goal is not to get them to do a perfect one. Obviously, it's just to get them the idea of squat means you get under something. But it's all put into games. So they have a lot of fun. Their sensory system's developing. So that's really as they enter training, about 5 to about 7 years old. And then I don't have a hard line for it because, yes, if you look at the literature, what's happening neurologically about 7 to 8 years old, their nervous system's myelinating. They're able to, their coordinative system, they're able to perform at a higher level. They're able to actually display mature versions of movement patterns. So if you're working with a child from 5 to 7 years old and you start introducing a squat or a push-up, by the time their nervous system's myelinated, they can actually look dang near perfect if they've been doing it for a while. But number one, they have to enjoy the process. So I always check back into, okay, are we able to play these games? Are we doing these things that they enjoy? And if they're a kid that just, they're just one of those kids that they're just, physical activity is not their thing. They'd rather be playing video games, or if they have a tough time paying attention, I'm not ramming these things down their throat. I'm keeping them active. I'm keeping them going in the right direction. But then you have these kids that will pay attention. So I really start to introduce isn't the word, because I've introduced some fundamental movement patterns and all that early on. But I start to kind of narrow the gates a little bit. So they start to understand that, well, squatting isn't just getting under a bar. There's squatting yourself under something. There's a way to do it. And that's really from about 7 to, it's not open-ended, but from about 7 to 9 or 10 years old, we're looking at things like that. And then again, it's a check-in. I mean, I have, to tell you the truth, Anthony, I've worked with 15, 16, 17-year-old jock athletes that I've had to start training them as if they were a 9-year-old, because they've had no training experience. They came out of the womb unbelievable. So when you get to that kind of 7 to 10, when now they have a myelinated nervous system, it's before puberty, it's before their big growth spurt. There's some little milestones theoretically that they reach. But again, when we're not working with 200, 300 kids at a time, we're working with an individual, then I'm seeing how they're individually reacting to training. Are they able to do these things? And that goes into the assessment protocol that I recommend is I time them running 10 yards, 20 yards, and that's just really for fun. Kids love being timed. They love having these benchmarks. But what I'm really doing is setting up essentially a subjective is, where are they at? If they're at a 1, like let's say a squat pattern, if they're at a 1, that means they don't even understand to bend their knees. Like they can't even initiate the pattern. If they're a 2, they don't do it consistently well. A 3, they do it inconsistently well. It means they do it well most of the time. A 4 means they need load because it's done so well. And really that's my assessment. I have my fundamental movement skills. I check them off. They're all integrated into games. And once they get to that point of puberty, so once we get after 10, some kids start going down that hall. They start making the changes around 11 or 12 years old. Then again, it's a recheck. Because one thing, Anthony, if we get too strict, people say, okay, wait a minute, you're 9 years old. Okay, you do this. What all that is based on is these large population studies, Hungarian, Polish, and Soviet youngsters that they were able to get all this data on. And they looked at all these kids all over the world that had these very controlled training situations. They looked what Joseph Drabik and all these guys were able to look at that. Well, but when you're looking at large populations, that gives you good ideas for trends, but it doesn't necessarily say much about the individual. It's like body mass index as a differentiator for obesity. It's like, well, for large populations, it gives you an idea, but for an individual, BMI might not mean anything because you might be working with someone with a lot of muscle. So once we get to that pre-puberty phase, I want to make sure that whatever they're heading into, so if they're interested they want to get in the weight room, I want to make sure that they're comfortable with what goes on in the weight room. If they're playing a sport, I want to make sure that they understand the acceleration, deceleration, direction change, all those different things, if that's the direction they're going. Again, if I got a kid that is not going that direction, which I highly recommend to the coaches out there that are working with young kids, we all want the stud athletes, but I'm telling you, we can make tremendous impacts and grow our business and become a backbone of our community when we're willing to learn how to work with the kids that the system has missed. And there's grown, I'm telling you, that number has grown exponentially in the last 10 years. So I'm preparing the kids for whatever their next step is. It could be they just want to do fun exercise things. They just want to do boot camp. They want to go into a sport. And once they've reached into puberty and once they start to hit that 15, where it's they're emerging from puberty, some kids are just entering into it, and they get to the point where they're honing in on a couple sports. Maybe they are a college track athlete. Maybe they're just a high school athlete. We start to make decisions from there. But the key is where I think a lot of us miss it is that young age sensory development, looking and seeing, okay, if I replicate play, I can develop the capacity to learn more. Once I have that capacity to learn, I can actually teach more effectively. The learning curve is shorter when things get more specific. And if we build it like that and really look at the individual, we understand the neurological milestones, we understand the growth milestones, we understand the hormonal milestones, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, even hormonally, if I have a child that is shown that they're good at something, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to load until they hit puberty, because they can get stronger. And even if they show they're doing well, until I get some anabolic hormone in there from the natural processes, they're not going to put on muscle. Their strength before puberty is essentially just motor learning. It's essentially they just learn how to do it more efficiently and better. So that's the way I've done it. That's the way I recommend to do it, is understand the science, but really work on an individual basis.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of coaches out there, like the high school coaches especially, and probably a couple college coaches. They get these athletes in there, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, kids that don't have those great motor skills, but they're pretty good athletes, right?
Yeah.
They've learned those sports. I think, because it's a delicate situation to be like, oh, you're going to go over there with into this group. I mean, how do you recommend? Because again, you've worked at in a place like that where you've seen all in Fitness Quest, where you've seen all kinds of kids coming in, athletes, regular population. How do you handle that kind of delicate situation?
So, I mean, you got some stud athlete that comes in there and all of a sudden you're essentially practically emasculating him in front of the whole room. Oh yeah, well, hey stud, you go over with the beginners because you can't squat well, or you don't have any depth, or you can't. So particularly working with high school, because start to get sensitive with that. What I did is when I work with big high school groups, I essentially created almost like a belt system in martial arts. So it was you started with this basic program. I took bench press out of the program because I was finding these kids were coming in, they couldn't squat their body weight, but they could bench their body weight. So I'm like, well, until you can squat your body weight, you're not benching. And that got their squats up real quick. And because it was just personally motivating for them, they wanted to bench. And so they're like, man, I'm going to pay attention to how I squat. But I gave them a basic program. They had to get these lifts checked off by me. So they started the red program. They had to get these lifts checked off by me so they could go to the green program. And what you found was the people that were naturally talented athletes that didn't have the particular weight room or speed skill, they were generally motivated. These are the ones that they're like, oh man, it was self-motivating. I got to get to that next, I got to get to the green program. And so these are the guys and gals that are staying after and practicing. And the ones that didn't, you got the athletes with a bad attitude. As a coach, I mean, we have to set boundaries. We have to set benchmarks, and I stuck to those benchmarks with those kids, and they came around, and then they saw how strong they got, and the coaches fell in love with the program and things like that. So you do have to be delicate, because you don't want to make a kid look stupid. But again, Anthony, too, when you look at, everyone judges by a program a lot of the time by challenge. And when I would have teams come in and they're, these guys are, state champions or whatever it is, and I have them do a lateral crawl and none of them can do it, they're like, oh man, maybe I do need to work on this stuff. Maybe I do need to work on these more basic skills. Because I'll tell you, if I got a team coming in and they're acing all the basic skills, well, I can progress anyway. But if they're some of the most basic fundamental skills, which I run pro athletes, I'm telling you, I used to work with a lot of baseball players. And I think guys that work with a lot of baseball players like Eric Cressy and some of these other guys, they'll agree. These guys will come in, they're all-stars at their sport, they got a great build, they've always been strong, but you get them into something where they're having to show some integration, some sort of neuromuscular integration, or use their body together in different coordinative patterns or in muscle sequencing or just something as basic as a crawl. They get down and it blows their mind that they can't do it. And my guys would always, the first 4 weeks of off-season training would encompass 75% of those type of movements. And it was an ego shock to them. In the first year they would come into the program, they'd hate it. And the veterans would all say, hey, just wait till we go to camp. Just wait till we get to camp. And they'd be the strongest they'd been in their life because we had taken that time to back down, build a foundation, go back up.
Talk to me about physical literacy and how that's different from physical fitness. Because I always felt like, all right, is this like, when we started to call ourselves sports performance coaches and director of, sports rehab and, whatever, like we have all these titles and are they just words? What is physical literacy?
So we started to, in physical literacy, the term's been around for a long time. And really it's, if you compare, so think about it this way, physical literacy, do you even have the ability? Is it in your system? Do you understand the parts of your body, how they move? Do you understand how to just the basic, you don't have to be fast, but do you understand how to run? Do you understand how to jump? Does your body know how to do all these different things? And is it comfortable with it? Is it relatively efficient? Are you competent and confident to be physically active for the rest of your life? Now, confidence, physically active. None of these words say anything about actual capacity or performance. They just say, hey, you have the ability to do it. Physical fitness tends to be a moment in time. It's, well, what is your capacity? How fit are you? What's your VO2 max? What's your, because different sports and different activities demand a different level of ability or a different level of capacity when it comes to your underlying operating systems. So physical literacy is a broader term. If we were to make it a goal as coaches to get all of our kids physically literate, that would mean that if I'm working with a bunch of 8th grade basketball players, knowing that they probably have only played basketball, they haven't had physical education, just going by the data, most of them haven't. They probably live in a more, they don't live out in the country where they're running around outside all day long. That means I am probably going to throw a soccer ball into the warm-up because these kids are going to need to know not only hand-eye coordination, but if I can teach them some level of foot-eye coordination. And I might throw in something that just seems so off the charts. And the younger they are, the more important that we introduce these whole things, because once they're done, 70-something% of kids are done playing sports by the time they're in 8th grade for a variety of reasons. So once they're done, I want to afford them other choices. Now, physical fitness is, okay, what's your capacity at this time? How, what's your VO2, heart rate, all these different things. So does that kind of make sense? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's just one of those things sometimes. It is one of those words that I just felt like sometimes people throw in there to kind of make it look a little bit more important than we are. But that makes sense. Brett, talk to me though about the role of the youth strength and conditioning coach, or really just any coaches out there, because number one, we know there's a childhood obesity epidemic, but as a gym owner, fitness facility owner, is it my responsibility? So talk to me about how you feel like your role has changed over the years. Obviously now you have Spider Fit, but even when you were at Fitness Quest 10 and you were kind of, these ideas were starting to come around, and the role that you feel like coaches can play in this idea in curbing childhood obesity.
Well, so we all want, I don't care if you're a high level sport coach or if you're someone who just works with every kid, you're in a community program and you just work with all comers or whatever it is. All of our goal is to inspire kids to be physically active and empower themselves through physical activity. But if you think about where we're at now, and all too often we don't stop and think about the realities of childhood obesity, because when we think about physical activity and its relationship to childhood obesity, a lot of us grew up in a time where we would, kids played outside. My parents would essentially put my brother and I outside and lock the door. And you guys stay busy. It's not our job to provide you stuff to do. We didn't have video games. We didn't have all that. So kids would play. We'd have PE in school. So we develop all these sensory skills during play. We go into PE. They would teach us a little more specific skills. And then they would introduce sports, because we didn't start doing club sports at 6 and 7 years old. So PE would introduce sports. We'd kind of see what we were feeling. And we would go join a rec sports league, and then the sport would teach us. We play 3 or 4 sports a year. And by the time you got to high school, you might have whittled it down to 2 or 3 sports or something like that. And then if they went to a extra coach or a personal trainer, well, my gosh, when even at the beginning of my career about 20 years ago, when I'm working with a kid, I'm like, well, shoot, they've been pretty active. They've had some physical education. They've been playing a lot of sports because the club programs hadn't quite completely monopolized the market. So I was like, well, shoot, they got this physical capacity. Now I can just do these very specific things. Like I can look at, okay, I'm going to fine tune here, fine tune there, introduce this and more advanced skill here. Well, over the years, that's deteriorated because, okay, well, kids aren't outside playing. There's tons of data. And you know why they're not outside playing is because we're not letting them as parents. I mean, shoot, my 4-year-old, I don't let her run around outside my house. I mean, we don't live right in the city in San Diego, but we live in a suburb and there's cars everywhere. There's weirdos everywhere. I mean, everyone listening to this right now, you know that there's weirdos and cars and streets, and we don't live out in the country. So it's like, okay, well, I'm not letting her run around outside like crazy. So then, well, 3% of America's grade schools have daily physical education. Okay, so we can say that, well, our kids aren't getting a lot of PE, if any. And
3%, did you say?
3% of America's grade schools have daily physical education.
Wow.
And I think the most recent number on at least 3 times a week is less than 15%. So it's just deteriorated. So, I got a kid and let's say, but sports is our savior right now. Sports is where we have this huge opportunity. But what the problem is that these club programs are monopolizing sports. So community rec programs are losing some steam. But let's say I'm a kid that my parents weren't athletic. I was born, I got, asthma. I'm that kid. And there's more and more and more of those kids. I mean, Anthony, I was an overweight kid. I was one of 2 kids that couldn't climb the rope when I was in 5th grade. One of 2 kids in an entire class. Now you're going to have 2 kids that can climb the rope in a class. It's totally different. So our role is switched as if we're in the private industry as strength coaches, our role is switched from the fine-tuned person to literally, and this is literal, I'm not over exaggerating. We might be, for some kids, the only exposure to physical activity they get. And let's say a kid doesn't even like sports and we end up getting it. Let's say a kid does like sports, but their parents, their coaches, their club program is stuffing soccer so far down their throat that they don't have time to breathe for anything else. Well, they're probably going to get injured, I hate to say it, or burnt out by the time they're in 8th grade. What next? And if we're not thinking about that as a coach working with kids, well, then we better be willing to pony up in 20 years from now when 50% of the U.S. is going to be diabetic, more than 60%, because I think we're a little over. If you put in overweight and obese, we're at about 60% of American adults. So by the time in 20 years, we might be looking at 70%. That's going to cost our healthcare system. So if we're not thinking about that other end, and are we giving these kids the skills? So that's really how our role has changed. So now we're not necessarily fine tuners. Like, we could be it. That's why if I'm working with a baseball team, I'll roll a soccer ball out there during a warm up, and the coaches might have a fit. And, if they have a fit and again, I'm at a point in my career where I'm comfortable doing this, that they're not going to work with me. Like, if the coach is going to have a fit because we're not doing nothing but baseball specific drills for their 9-year-olds, I'm not going to contribute to that machine. You do need some sizzle with your steak. Learn how to communicate to coaches and don't shut them down and say their program's stupid or what they want is stupid. But it's just learning how to navigate that a little more carefully. But our roles in the industry have changed, and we really need to realize that. And in that, we need to expand our base of knowledge and expand what we're comfortable with teaching.
And I know for me, when I took the Titleist Junior program, and I had like this amazing balance beam, and like I got this basketball, kids basketball thing, and I have a bunch of little hockey sticks. Mostly those are for me, but I have like so much stuff, and I had these junior golfers who I was training, and we were having a ball. We were doing like obstacle courses and stuff.
Yeah.
But it does take a little bit extra room. Coach Boyle, I tried to get him to do it at NBSC, and he just felt like it would take away from some of the, I don't know I forget what he was kind of like, the mindset of the place, the feel of the place, because here's pro athletes with little kids. It doesn't always have to be like that, but What can people do? How do we reach more kids, number one? But what do we need to do to be prepared in our facilities to help them gain some of this physical literacy?
So to address kind of the first part of that, Anthony, I think we're at this point, and it's been like this for a while. And people look at, Mike Boyle's been able to be successful from a business standpoint, work with higher level athletes and kids and professional athletes. And he's been able to do it successfully from a business level. The amount of people that have been able to do that successfully and hone in on that specific demographic. And when I say successfully, I mean, what your numbers are. You're more than paying rent. You're feeding your family. You're not working 120 hours a week to do it, but you've been able to create a model. I'm sorry, it's a very, 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 very small percentage of people. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the best things that we can do individually is just say, you know what? I'm a passionate coach. I ain't Mike Boyle right now. And looking and saying, okay, how many pro athletes do I actually work with? And are they paying the bills? I'll tell you right now, working at Fitness Quest 10, when I was directing athletic there, and I still have a great relationship with Fitness Quest 10, the pro athletes are great marketing. They ain't paying the bills, man. As famous as the athletes that come in there, they are not the ones paying the bills. It's the everyday people. It's the kids camps. It's the things that happen all year round. And these people don't disappear for 6 months out of the year or 7 months out of the year or anything like that. So that's the first. If you're owning a facility right now and you're considering putting kids programs, but you're afraid that during 2 months out of the year where you might have 3 sort of on the cusp pro athletes come in, or your dream is to, I would evaluate, because if you go out of business and you can't feed your family, you can't help anybody. So I would evaluate really where you're at with your business and just realize that, especially if you're working with grade school kids, they're there year round. Grade school kids don't have the demand for practices or team lifting or something like a high school kid would. So there's a lot of opportunity in saying that. It could be if you have mostly adults that come into your facility, you don't have a lot of room, it might not be a good cultural combination, like you having balance beams and kids running all over the place. And so you really have to assess where you're at with everything. But I will tell you this, every gym in America is dead essentially from 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. You're paying rent and ain't making money. So if you're willing to expand your notion of, okay, who do you work with? If you could get a program for 5-year-olds where it's kind of like a Gymboree sort of situation. I mean, right now you got like a Gymboree, and I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but it's, for little kids. My daughter did it. They go and they just kind of guided play through these little obstacle courses and that. Well, that's from about 1 to 3 years old. They got programs, and maybe for some 4-year-olds. Then they just sort of release them into the wild, and then we pick them up again on the other side of grade school with programs. Well, if you could work with younger kids, moms and kids or something like that, I have not done that, but I'm looking right now at where are the opportunities. I think that's an opportunity. If someone's willing to look at that, it's a way to increase revenues in gyms and do things like that. But you do have to decide, really look at, okay, are you going to serve kids or are you not? And if you are, be good at serving kids. I see this all the time. Someone's like, oh, yeah, I work with kids, but really, I'm going for the top draft picks and blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of posturing when we get together at events and things like that. Man, if you're going to work with kids, own that you work with kids, become an expert, be the person that hey, that is the person that's changing kids' lives. Own that. Don't say, well, yeah, I got some kids, but really I'm going for pros. Man, I used to be that guy. And that's just not making the contribution. If you want to work with kids, own working with kids. Be the best at working with kids. Make your facility great with working with kids. And then you move past your ego. If you're paying rent and you really are living your dream and doing everything you want to with pro athletes, that's awesome. Keep doing it. But if you're not, right now might be the time to do a little gut check and say, hey, have I been leaning my career with my ego? Or am I on a mission? I'm actually helping change lives. And part of changing lives is having your own capacity from an energy standpoint and even from a financial standpoint to sustain.
Love it. I want to add to that, I had a couple, I trained golfers, so mostly my demographic was older, like anywhere from 50 to 82. And I started training some of my older folks in the 70s with the way you would train somebody between 5 and 7 and people who listen to the podcast. So I started to get them almost like back on the playground where we like kick the soccer ball around, we pass the hockey, street hockey ball around, play some football, run some routes, basketball with the kids, the little kids thing. I would pitch to them. There's some things that basically kind of getting them back on the playground with some of those movements. So it's not something that you only have to do with the kids, because I can tell you that the older adults kind of really love doing it. It doesn't have to take up the whole place. Just, you can just do it for, 5-10 minutes in a little part of the gym if you have some space. But
it's so true. To add to that, I'll tell you, I'll be honest, like one of my struggles right now is I'm staying focused on getting, I got a certification coming out for Spider Fit Kids, for working with grade school kids and all this. It's hard because so much of it, because adults are enjoying all the activities I've thrown in so much. And it's so great for like boot camp camaraderie, and it's so good for coordination and fall prevention. All these, it's hard for me to focus and not be like, well, okay, I'm going to do an adult one and a kid one and a this and a that and a that, because honestly, these more play-based they help so many people that it's like, well, shoot, this is what's missing out there. And we've gotten so streamlined that we're bordering on almost boring the people. We've gotten so far away from play, because you don't want to just play, because then you're not really learning anything and you're not necessarily helping bodies. But man, you integrate that in. Play hits the soul, not just the body. And I don't care if you're 6 years old or 96 years old.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, give us, I know you have a couple resources that people can learn some of you have a certification coming out, I guess, but talk to me, just give us 2 minutes on where we can get more information about your stuff.
Yeah, so we're very active on our Spider Fit Kids Facebook page. That's updated multiple times a day with a lot of video, with any blogs that I write on any of this stuff. We have if you go to powerfulplaycourse.com, that's our online course for CECs. It's CECs with ACE, NASM, NSCA, AFAA. I think that's what it is. But it's got CECs, and it essentially walks you through, okay, I talked about sensory development, but it walks you through what's the science behind that and what's the application. We have like 90 activities, games, individual activities. We also have our 60 ways to play, and that's at 60waystoplay.com. That's our resource, which is warm-ups. And we've taken looking at really, okay, what's important for kids with a neural system that really hasn't been developed yet. Where can we start how can we make warm-ups interesting? How can we teach fundamental movement skill, but then give it a little bit of extra, make it a little bit more play? And so, looking at that's the 60 ways to play. But on our website, spiderfitkids.com, that's where we have our blog. That's where we have information on everything else that's coming up. And then in April, we'll be having the live, and I'm finalizing our spot right now, but in April, we'll be having our live Spider Fit Kids certification. And that's going to be the Mac Daddy of the combination of really everything for that grade school to early middle school demographic, anywhere from physical development, to honestly how to make a business viable. So some marketing things and things like that. So that's been a project for a long time. I'm excited to finally get it out.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Well, Brett, thanks so much for number one. Like I said earlier, you've been a long-time contributor to StrengthCoach.com, so thanks for that. And it's just been great talking to you, somebody who's so passionate and knowledgeable about training the young folks, and not just for college scholarships. So we appreciate you coming on and sharing your stuff.
Hey, thank you, Anthony. Appreciate what you do.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 224 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Pryor and the folks over at Perform Better. Can't do this without them. Right now, Perform Better select items 30% off next one-day seminars in LA, February 10th. And remember, Perform Better has some financing. You can check it out all at performbetter.com for their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Brett Klika for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning, performance enhancement, and youth training. Brett's company, Spider Fit Kids, they're going to be offering their first Powerful Play Level 1 Cert in San Diego in April. Only 20 spots available. You can contact Brett Klika at brett@spiderfitkids.com. I'll have that link on Continue Fit as well. Thanks to Train Heroic. Remember to head over to trainheroic.com. You can start your 14-day free trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 25% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro Edition. Thanks to Alan Cosgrove and Results Fitness University for the Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Gray Cook and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And of course, remember you can try strengthcoach.com out 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs. Best of all, Coach Boyle is on every day. You can ask him questions, post them on the forum. He's on every day. There's no other place to access Coach Boyle every day. Go to strengthcoach.com, click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Rana. You can go to continuefit.com for all of the show notes and other links. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.